You're not helping. Go somewhere else. Welcome back to another episode of Mr. McCune's Minute Science. We are here in the woods, in the trails, on Earth Day as we film this. Unfortunately, it is like 42 degrees outside and overcast, but we're gonna go on a little nature walk because it is time for us to start talking about evolution, Charles Darwin, and a little bit of natural selection. So we're gonna intro this video here in my backyard, kind of the trail system, the creek system that runs through my backyard, and we're gonna go looking for every single little critter that we can find. We're gonna go look for them. Rogue's here too. Rogue, come up. Yes, Rogue is here too. This is his favorite place in the world. He loves Earth Day because he just loves running in the woods. But let's go after some critters. All of this starts with a familiar face or a familiar name for you guys, which is Charles Darwin. He's the first person to really link us to this idea of evolution or watching traits change from the environment in a species over time. But it all kind of started on an island. We're gonna need an island. Welcome to our Earth Day island. Me and Rogue found this island. It's our favorite island, and we're gonna talk to you about Charles Darwin, about the island that he was on, the Galapagos Island, when he was touring off the coast of South America. What he noticed on this island was that the animals, the species there, differed from the species on the mainland. They might be the same overall animal, an iguana, a finch, but the characteristics of the iguanas and the finches on the Galapagos Island were far different than the characteristics on the mainland. Why was that? They were sequestered apart from each other, miles apart, yet these ones had different characteristics, different beak sizes, different colors, different sizes, different shapes, and at the same time, the exact same species miles away on the mainland was the typical species. He started linking this back to some fossilized data. So he could find fossils in Argentina of giant sloths. You could go down to Florida right now, wade the river, Florida Everglades, avoid the alligators, and you could find giant sloth teeth. These sloths were bigger than bears. They roamed the land. Yet the sloths we have today, they are slow, they are smaller, they hang out in the trees, they aren't terrestrial walking around. What happened to the sloths? Why did they change through time? And so he started to connect these dots and realize that species were adapting to environment. They were adapting to different conditions, and we call this natural selection. So there's several key functions of natural selection. Do some animal digging, some animal finding here on our island to see if we can find any examples of natural selection or adaptive features that make those animals much better or more prone to survival and breeding. We found our first little critter. We found a crayfish with only one main pincher. Rogue really likes crayfish. He's very interested in what this thing is. What is this alien that I unturned from the rocks? So this is a perfect example to kind of look at some of the three things that affect natural selection. And natural selection are the traits that are going to get passed down through generations of an animal that make it easier for it to survive, or make it easier for it to reproduce, to eat food, to gain territory, to do all the things that this crayfish needs to do to survive and pass on its genes to another batch of crayfish here in this Ohio stream. So one thing that's already not going for it is losing one of its main appendages. Now, losing that main appendage makes it harder for this animal to feed, to capture food. It makes it much harder for it to defend its own territory too. So if there was another male or female crayfish that was looking to bide for that territory, it would struggle to defend itself because it's missing a main piece of appendage. I bet that's how this one lost its appendage to begin with. Some other crayfish had torn it off. In fact, you can see the mitosis happening. I don't know if you can get that nice and close up, but there is another appendage that is being grown, regrown. It'll never be the same, but it is being regrown a lot like a lizard's tail. So what this gives us an example of is there's some things that change natural selection. There are three things: overproduction, variation, and competition. For the crayfish, I want to talk about variation because crayfish can come out a couple different ways. Crayfish can come out bigger or smaller. They can come out faster. They can come out with a harder exoskeleton or a softer exoskeleton. And all of those things lead to it being able to do things better than its peers, right? If it has a harder skeleton or a harder exoskeleton, then it will be able to defend off predators easier. It won't get eaten as easily. If it is faster and can backlash quicker, it can get away from predators faster. If it is larger, it can defend more territory, it can eat more food, it has a better chance of finding an applicable mate. So all of those variations in a species can lead to it surviving more regularly. And we know our heredity now, we know how genes pass through. So if this crayfish possessed the genes that made it survive, and it breeds with another crayfish that was surviving, we gotta put this guy back in the water though. Hold on, we gotta say goodbye to the little crayfish guy. Leave him, leave him, leave. That crayfish were to mate with another crayfish that happens to have the right stuff for survival, they have a higher chance of passing down other traits that are gonna be keen for survival. And therefore, the new breed and over generations and generations, all of these crayfish are going to adapt to be larger, faster, harder shelled, because those are the ones that are making it. Stumbled across, I believe, this would be a deer vertebrae. Rogue would love to chew it, but it's probably a little dirty. You can see the bone marrow kind of hardening and crystallizing inside of this. This is really neat. I like this. You want this? This for you? Nature dog? So I found the next critter, and I found a salamander, which is, and I'll post the species just because there's so many different Ohio salamanders. I'm not sure what this one is off the top of my head. But you can tell that he's got some orange speckling down his back. And I'll try to get some close-up images of him. I'm gonna let him crawl a little bit. And he's an amphibian. And the coloring will help a salamander with several things. One, attracting a mate. We see that a lot with like aviary species. So birds will have really specific colors or dances or other movements that help them find mates. Salamanders can use colors. They can also use these colors to ward off predators. So a lot of times predators understand that highly toxic animals are brightly colored. It's a defense mechanism. So these animals will try to mimic, and you see this with like poison dart frogs or other frog species and amphibian species especially, that'll try to breed in really bright coloring, and this orange speckling on this is trying to help it with that. But also it looks exactly like the mud. So when you lift up a rock and find a salamander underneath it, the mud is going to be the exact same color as this thing's back. So it's a camouflage that he's trying to pass on. So all of these traits that are helping this salamander survive are going to help future generations change to be more like the one that survived. It's that survival of the fittest mentality. That works its way into evolution. Let's put this guy back in his home. We don't want to keep him out too long. He is absolutely adorable and sweet. Let's get a close-up of him. He is adorable and sweet. He is a nice salamander. And I'm actually really happy I found one because I thought it was going to be too cold and too early in the season to find one of these. Yesterday, Rogue pulled a 30-inch trout from this water. It was a dead one, but he pulled it out and he was like, Dad, look what I found. Rogue, come! It's a dead fish and it stinks and I love it. I want to catch a common Ohio water snake. It might bite me, but that's good television, isn't it? So what I'm gonna do that for is because there's another factor that affects natural selection. We've already said that variation is one factor, that competition was another factor, and the third factor that drastically affects natural selection is overpopulation. So the water snake that I wanna find, and I know where they are, it just needs sun for them to bask, but in April, which is right around this time, they start spawning and breeding. Now they breed upwards of 100 snakes at a time. So creating a lot of offspring is crucial to natural selection because if there's so many organisms, it puts a natural pressure on the organisms, eliminate the bad features. The features or the traits that aren't helping them survive. So there has to be enough of them to pressure them, because if the environment could take as many organisms that it could throw at it, then there would be no reason for those organisms to adapt because there's no natural pressure for them to change. So we need overproduction of a species, and that's why I'm going to use the common water snake once I can find one when it's not 40 degrees and cloudy. Come on, Ohio, shape up. So as Ohio has decided to hail on us, we're going to exit the stream and go back to the house and get cleaned up. But I want to kind of note on the most important things that I was trying to accomplish with this little vlog through the woods. First thing was to introduce Charles Darwin and the theory of evolution, which changed science forever. We also want to note that there were three major things that affected natural selection. And natural selection is this natural process of weeding out species that don't have the traits that are good for survival or breeding or competition. So there were three main factors. Overproduction. There needs to be an over-reproduction of that species to put natural pressures on it. There needs to be variation. So some species in that same litter or in that same batch of offspring are going to have different things. So maybe turtles have harder shells. Maybe some of them can swim faster. Maybe some of them are darker, have different shape. And one of those is going to lead itself to being more applicable for survival. That trait should then pass on. And the last one is competition. And now this is not straight up boxing matches and fighting all the time. It's competition for space, for food, for territory, for breeding rights. All of those things kind of add up, and you put those three factors together and it puts stress on that species, and then they can go through the natural selection process, change, adapt, evolve, and become more suited for their environment. That's all for now. Peace.